Welcome to another video edition of Bill on Bankruptcy. As that title suggests, I'm Bill Rochelle, Editor-at-Large for American Bankruptcy Institute. We're going to be talking now with Ariane Holschlag from the law offices of William Factor in Chicago. Ariane is a consumer lawyer, not necessarily always on the side of the consumer, but that is her area of expertise. She's got her law degree out of the University of Iowa, and among the younger lawyers in this country, she has caught the attention of former bankruptcy judge Gene Weedoff, who is this year the president of the ABI, and she will be at this conference here in, where are we, Palm Springs, on the important panel about current developments in consumer law. And it's interesting that I think it was yesterday, Ariane, I read a very interesting opinion by Senior District Judge Bucklow in Chicago about, of all things, unpaid parking tickets. I don't want to bore you or the audience too much with the particular issues involved, but the case had to do with post-petition parking tickets in Chapter 13. And the import of this decision was that District Judge Bucklow held that post-petition parking tickets in 13 do not qualify as expenses of administration, which would give them a priority over pretty much everything else. Well, I don't want to talk with you so much about that opinion, but here's what I want to talk about, Ariane. I gather from the tenor of this opinion and the efforts that the city of Chicago is making to get a different result, that parking tickets are a big deal in bankruptcy in Chicago. Is that right?
It's true, and I actually, strangely enough, think that the city of Chicago is on the side of the consumer here, actually.
Really? By trying to... Well, now that's going to take some explaining. So by trying to confiscate people's cars, the city of Chicago is on the side of the consumer.
Indeed, I think some of the larger high-volume firms in the city of Chicago are effectively preying on consumers who get behind on their parking tickets. And so, in a difficulty and the urgency of getting their car back from the pound, rush to a bankruptcy attorney to get their vehicle back and end up paying significantly more in attorney's fees instead of getting on a payment plan with the city of Chicago. As the city of Chicago has been pressing these legal decisions in the bankruptcy court, they've also taken steps to reduce what's required to be on a not outside of bankruptcy payment plan directly with the city of Chicago.
You mean to tell me that, among other things, the, as you call them, bankruptcy mills are putting people into 13 when they might be eligible for 7?
They might be eligible for 7, and they might be able, the parking tickets are determined to be a non-dischargeable debt.
Right.
So a Chapter 7 wouldn't help them eliminate the parking tickets, but potentially they could file a Chapter 7, discharge their other debts, and free up cash to get on a payment plan with the city of Chicago without paying the hefty fees for a Chapter 13 bankruptcy attorney.
So what kind of fees are we talking about for 13s in Chicago, just that's designed perhaps primarily to get your car back?
Chapter 13, the flat fee, the no-look fee, the presumptively reasonable rate in Chicago is $4,000. So if you've got $2,000 in parking tickets and you're paying $4,000 to an attorney, that doesn't make a lot of financial sense.
Whoa, let's stop. So in other words, you pay $4,000 to the lawyer, and you're not going to be able to haircut the parking authority. You still got to pay the $2,000, right?
That's correct. Well, in Chapter 13, the fines are they are dischargeable in Chapter 13, not in 7.
Ah, so that's a legitimate use for 13 then.
Certainly, but if you're trimming, let's say you're paying a 10% plan, which is the most common repayment.
Okay, but still though, you're saying that you're paying $4,000 in legal fees to discharge $2,000 in parking fines.
Correct.
Dubious economics, I guess.
Indeed. And so that's why I think it's one of the, maybe it's not a legal issue, but I think it's certainly one of the ways that consumers are being taken advantage of. I wonder how many of those consumers understand the full amount of the fee that they're paying their attorneys in those Chapter 13 cases.
Well, I dare say they probably don't at all. So how do the lawyers get paid in these typical Chapter 13 plans? And what are the structures of the plans?
Sure. So in Chapter 13, what's dominant in the city of Chicago are no money down Chapter 13s. So the attorneys will file the case for no money down. You don't have to come up with any retainer up front, and will accept all of their payments over time through the plan. But oftentimes, the attorneys are engaging in a practice that I call fee jumping, where the attorneys rearrange the traditional priorities that we see in the plan to put their attorney's fees ahead of anything else in the plan. And so, you know, if the plan fails after 18 months, which is about the average, all the money that the debtors paid in, instead of going towards paying down the parking tickets, is going towards paying the attorney. And so then the debtor emerges from bankruptcy further behind the financial 8 ball than when they went in.
Well, I would guess also that if the attorney's fees come first, if there are other secured debts provided for in the plan, those may also not be paid.
That's
Is
absolutely
that right?
correct. And again, I'm not certain that the debtors understand that that's what's going on.
They just know there's a couple $100 coming out of their
Exactly.
paychecks, and they're not really sure where it goes.
So I think this practice is a real issue for those of us who like to fight for consumers.
Wow. Also, it sounds as though there is some element of a conflict of interest there, it seems to me.
Certainly. So I actually don't do these types of cases in my own practice. I consider the revolving door of Chapter 13 and the fee jumping to be an ethical violation. And so I don't engage in those practices in my own practice. Whether or not it's allowed under the bankruptcy code, I consider it to be an ethical violation.
Well, one of the things that I noted in Judge Bucklow's opinion, which struck me as rather interesting, in a typical 13 case, at confirmation, the property of the estate would revest in the debtor. And if that were the case, then the city of Chicago could glom the cars as soon as you have confirmation.
Certainly.
Done. However, Judge Bucklow said that the typical plan in Chicago,
And here we're talking about the post-petition.
right, post-petition traffic tickets, provides that property remains property of the estate after confirmation up until, I guess, the completion of the 5-year plan. How did that come about?
Well, that brings us full circle back to Judge Wiedoff.
Oh, really?
So Judge Wiedoff imposed that, and so that's our local confirmation order that requires that, contrary to the bankruptcy code, which would provide for revesting in the debtor upon confirmation, that it remains property of the estate. And certainly that has some benefits for the debtor.
Yes.
And certainly this parking tickets is one way, but as you can see, it can also be used in ways that can hurt the debtor.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you this, Ariane. In your typical 13 case that, among other things, is designed to get your car back, when in the process do the debtors get physical possession of their cars?
Well, so now, the city of Chicago has really become aggressive, and so it used to be under Thompson that the city of Chicago was giving the vehicles back immediately upon filing of the Chapter 13 case.
All right.
Now, the city of Chicago, since they've been pursuing this line of argument, has taken the position, and I think successfully, it hasn't gone up on appeal yet, but in several of our bankruptcy courts in the Northern District of Illinois have upheld, based on the city's possessory lien, that the city of Chicago doesn't have to return the vehicle until confirmation and adequate protection is provided, their secured claim is treated, and so the vehicle doesn't have to be returned until confirmation, which, as you know, can be 3 months, 6 months, 9 months after the case is filed.
Right. Well, that's very interesting. That is similar to I believe it's a recent Sixth Circuit opinion, which held that the mere filing of a petition in 13 or 11 does not require a lender to return repossessed collateral.
Oh, interesting.
But this is a bit different, though, because the city, I think you said, claims it has a possessory lien,
Right.
which would disappear if they gave the car back. Is that right?
That's correct.
Uh-huh. Oh my goodness. This is difficult stuff.
It's a lot going on.
Gosh. You know, I presume one of these issues about the parking tickets is going to get to the Seventh Circuit. I'm going to ask you a terrible question. Do you have a guess how the decision will come down from the Seventh, or do you think that's going to depend upon who happens to sit on the panel?
I think the cities, in terms of not returning the vehicle upon case filing and not until confirmation, on that issue, I believe if it goes to the Seventh Circuit, the city will win, regardless of who's on the panel. This other issue regarding the post-petition parking tickets that the recent opinion came out, honestly, I'm not sure on that. That's a big question mark, so we'll all have to stay tuned and see.
Well, you know,
how
I
it turns
think I
out.
agree with you about Judge Bucklow's decision. I mean, she tried really hard and wrote a really fine opinion on behalf of debtors, but you know, my sense tells me it's not a slam dunk in the circuit, and may very much depend on who's on the panel. At least I hope that when it goes up, I hope that the Chief Judge Wood is on that panel. She is terrific.
Yes.
She really gets bankruptcy law. I can never really predict how she's going to rule, but Lord of mercy, she does a really fine job. So let's keep our fingers crossed that she's on the panel. Well, Arian, this has been extremely interesting for me to learn more about what's happening in Chicago with parking tickets. Whoever would have thunk that parking tickets would be a major issue of consumer importance in Chicago, but I guess that's what happens when you're in an urban environment where people have to park their cars on the street.
It's true.
This stuff happens. Oh well. Well, I guess maybe we'll come back next year and see where this litigation is at the time.
Sounds good.
Meanwhile, Arian, I thank you very much for your time, and please continue the good work, doing the right thing, ethically, on behalf of debtors.
Well, I will try. Thank you so much, Bill, for your time.
Thank you for coming.